Because today actually it was announced by NASOGIS that November set a new all-time record for November temperatures. And so we now have only 1 month left, and 2010 is still the warmest year on record in the 150 odd years of instrumental records. Arctic sea ice this year is hovering around record low, and Hudson's Bay, unlike ever before, has essentially no sea ice, as we are here in December. We're at the beginning of December, there's essentially no sea ice in Hudson's Bay. I mean, this will obviously have some rather dire consequences for those polar bears who are seeking to fatten up before they go into the winter season. We have to also today our elected leaders sitting in Cancun, hopefully coming up with some form of an agreement. Whether it's binding or not, we have yet to be seen. But what they have already agreed to happened last year in Copenhagen. In Copenhagen last year, I would argue that leaders abdicated their responsibility to govern, but what they did come up with was something that they agreed to take note of. That is, 140 nations have agreed to take note of the Copenhagen Accord, which aspires to limit global temperature increases to 2 degrees above pre-industrial times. As part of that, leaders around the world have submitted voluntary aspirational targets to the UNFCCC. But what's of interest is that, on the one hand, these leaders have agreed to limit warming by 2 degrees. On the other hand, these very same targets that were submitted guarantee that we break 2 degrees. And not only that, they put us into 50-50 odds that we'll break 3 degrees in the next 90 years and 4 degrees thereafter. So, clearly there's a staggering disconnect between policy at the international level and science. And nowhere else in the world is that disconnect greater than here in Canada, where we have a federal government whose only policy, it seems, on the climate front is to ensure that we maximize exploitation of tar sands in as quick a time as possible before any regulations come into place, because then we won't have to worry about it because we've already exploited that resource. So here we are today. We have in Canada statements, very, very warm and fuzzy statements, about our desire to follow international meetings, to do our part, that this is a very serious concern. But what have we said to the world? Well, in 1997, whether or not you agree in the Kyoto Accord or not, we signed it and we ratified it in 2005. We're the only country in the world that has said to the rest of the world that we do not stand up to our international agreements. We basically told the world, enough, we're not going to deal with this. So we decided in 2007, shortly after the election of our current administration, that we would have a Made in Canada solution instead of a Made in UN solution. And that Made in Canada solution was to limit emissions 3% below 1990 levels by the year 2020. Compare that to the Kyoto Agreement, which was to limit 6% below 1990 levels by 2020. But not to be outdone, in yet another about-face, we decided in 2010, earlier this year, that we'd rather have a Made-in-US solution, such that now we've told the world that we're going to ignore the Kyoto Protocol, we're going to ignore our previous commitments, under our election platform for a Made-in-Canada solution, and we're going to lean to a Made-in-US solution, which will allow us, perhaps voluntarily, to increase emissions by 2.5% relative to 1990 levels by the year 2020. Is there any surprise that the rest of the world looks upon Canada as laggards and obstructionists in this climate business? On the one hand, we tell the world we're behind them, we believe in this issue. On the other hand, we do exactly the opposite.
Dinosaurs.
There we go.
Cowards.
Yeah, and that too. On that, finally, what I found most profoundly upsetting this past year is that our elected representatives from the Liberals, the NDP and the Bloc Québécois put together Bill C-311 as a multi-party initiative, and for the second time it was defeated. But unlike the first time it was defeated when a snap election was called, this time it was defeated by petty politics at its very worst level. It made it to the Senate, and without even being debated in the Senate, the senators who were, the Conservative senators, many of whom were appointed in the last couple of years, voted en masse to reject it. And this is the first time in history, of course, this has happened without any debate. So this to me, again, whether or not you support Bill C-311 is irrelevant. To me, what is relevant is the role of the Senate, an unelected Senate, is for a sober second look upon legislation which is passed by our lower house. This didn't happen, and Canadians did not have a chance, whether they supported or opposed it, to have their voices heard in the governance of our country, and in particular with respect to this issue.